I swear I wasn't snooping. That's the part that still messes with my head, because the moment that detonated my entire marriage started with something so stupid and ordinary that even now it feels unreal. I was standing in our kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, half awake, pouring cereal, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app for the little camera above our garage. At first I ignored it because those things go off constantly whenever a cat walks by, but then I glanced down and saw a black SUV parked in our driveway that I did not recognize. The timestamp said 2:14 a.m. I remember staring at the screen while the cereal went soggy in the bowl and thinking, why would anyone be at my house at 2 in the morning when I was asleep upstairs with my wife? My name is Michael Turner, I'm 37, and up until that morning I believed my marriage was solid. My wife Ashley and I had been together 9 years, married for 6, the kind of couple people always described as a little sarcastic but strong. Looking back now, the warning signs were probably there for months. She had started guarding her phone like it contained nuclear codes, turning the screen away from me whenever a message came in, suddenly working late meetings twice a week, even though her job in marketing had always been a predictable 9 to 5. Every time I asked about it, she rolled her eyes and said something like, "Michael, not everything is a conspiracy. Sometimes adults actually have responsibilities." I told myself I was overthinking it, because that's what you do when you trust someone. But that SUV in the driveway would not leave my mind alone. So while Ashley was in the shower, I opened the security footage and watched the clip. The video showed the same black SUV pulling up quietly in the dark, headlights off like whoever was driving didn't want attention, and then I watched a man step out and walk straight to my front door like he had been there before. The door opened almost immediately, and Ashley stepped out in sweatpants and one of my old college hoodies. She looked around the street for a second, laughing about something the guy said. Then she leaned against the door frame talking to him for nearly 10 minutes before finally climbing into his passenger seat and driving away with him. I stood there holding my phone so tightly my hands started shaking, because the timestamp on the video said 2:16 a.m., which meant that while I was asleep upstairs believing my wife was beside me, she had quietly walked out of the house to meet another man in the middle of the night. And the worst part was that when she came back inside an hour later, the footage showed her tiptoeing upstairs and sliding back into bed next to me like nothing had happened. That was the moment I realized something in my life was about to break, and I had absolutely no idea how deep the lie actually went. I didn't confront her right away, and honestly, that decision probably saved me from looking like a paranoid idiot if I had somehow been wrong. But the truth is, I already felt something inside me shifting the moment I watched that footage. I spent the entire morning acting normal while my brain replayed that video over and over like a loop I couldn't turn off. Ashley came downstairs wrapped in a towel, hair wet, humming like it was the most peaceful Tuesday morning in the world, and she smiled at me with that casual warmth that used to make me feel lucky to be married to her. Then she poured coffee, leaned on the counter, and said in this slightly annoyed voice, "Why do you look like you didn't sleep at all, Michael? You stayed up gaming again like a teenager?" And I remember thinking how surreal it felt that the person who had quietly slipped out of the house at 2 in the morning was now criticizing my sleep schedule like I was the irresponsible one. I forced myself to keep my voice calm and asked her something simple that shouldn't have been dangerous. Something like, "Did you go anywhere last night?" And she looked at me like I had just asked if the sky was green. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive laugh that instantly made me feel small, and said, "Of course not. Where exactly would I go at 2 in the morning? The grocery store." Then she added, with that familiar tone she uses whenever she thinks I'm being stupid, "Michael, you really need to stop imagining problems where none exist." That moment hit me harder than the video itself because it meant she could lie without even blinking. Not hesitation, not confusion, just smooth, confident denial. Like the truth was something she could casually rewrite. And while she stood there complaining about her meeting schedule for the day, something inside me made a quiet decision. If she was lying that easily, I needed to know how deep the lie actually went before I said a single word. So instead of confronting her like any normal husband probably would have done, I spent the next few hours doing something that honestly made me feel like a spy in my own house. I checked the rest of the security footage and discovered that the SUV hadn't shown up just once. It had appeared 3 times in the past 2 weeks, always late at night, always the same pattern. The car arrives, Ashley steps outside, they talk like people who already know each other well, and then she leaves with him for about an hour before returning home. At that point, my stomach felt like it had dropped through the floor because suddenly all those late meetings and extra projects she kept mentioning started forming a pattern that was impossible to ignore. But the moment that really twisted the knife came later that afternoon when I made a mistake that changed everything. I decided to check our phone bill, something I had never done before in our entire marriage because I had never had a reason to doubt her. And that was when I saw the number that appeared dozens of times in the call logs, sometimes for an hour at a time, always late at night. The contact name saved under that number on Ashley's phone was something that made my heart stop completely. It was simply labeled Emily, work. Except the call history showed that the phone registered to that number belonged to a man. Seeing that name in the call logs was the moment my confusion turned into something darker, because suddenly every late-night conversation Ashley claimed was with her co-worker Emily started looking like a carefully crafted lie. I sat there at my desk, staring at the number for a long time, feeling that weird mixture of anger and disbelief that comes when reality refuses to line up with the story you've been living in. My first instinct was to dial the number immediately, confront whoever was on the other end, demand answers. But another voice in my head kept repeating the same warning. If you confront her now, she'll just lie again and erase everything. So instead, I did something I never imagined myself doing in my own marriage. I copied the number into a search engine and waited. At first, nothing showed up except a few generic results, and for a brief moment I almost felt relieved. Like maybe I had misunderstood something and this entire nightmare would dissolve into embarrassment. But then one result appeared from a small company website, a staff directory from a local construction firm. The name attached to that phone number was Daniel Carter, project supervisor, 39 years old. I remember leaning back in my chair, staring at that name while a slow wave of realization washed over me. Daniel Carter was not Emily. Daniel Carter was a man who had been talking to my wife late at night, a man who apparently drove a black SUV and knew exactly when to pull into my driveway while I was asleep upstairs. And the more I thought about it, the more pieces started falling into place in ways that made my stomach twist. Ashley had started going to the gym earlier than usual, about 3 months ago, which meant she left the house before sunrise twice a week. Around that same time, she began complaining about how stressful her job had become and how she needed someone who actually listens when she talks. At the time, I had nodded sympathetically, thinking she meant coworkers or friends. Now I realized she might have been talking about him the entire time. The most surreal part came that evening when she came home from work acting exactly like she always did. She tossed her purse onto the kitchen counter, kicked off her heels dramatically, and launched into a long, irritated rant about how incompetent her coworkers were. She paced around the kitchen while I cooked dinner, talking non-stop about deadlines and meetings, and at one point, she looked straight at me and said something that made my chest tighten. Honestly, Michael, sometimes I feel like you're the only honest person in my life. Everyone else just lies and pretends. She said it so casually, with that slightly annoyed tone she uses whenever she feels intellectually superior to everyone around her, and I had to physically turn away so she wouldn't see the expression on my face. Because at that exact moment, I knew something she didn't know yet. I had already sent a message to the number saved under Emily, work, and the response I received 10 minutes later confirmed that Daniel Carter absolutely knew who my wife was. What he didn't know was that the person he had just replied to wasn't Ashley. It was me. When Daniel Carter replied to my message, the first thing I felt wasn't rage or heartbreak like you might expect. It was something colder and quieter. Like the moment when a puzzle piece finally snaps into place and you suddenly see the whole, ugly picture at once. His response popped up on my phone while I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch TV with Ashley, and it said, "Hey, everything okay? You usually call instead of texting this late." That single sentence told me two things immediately. First, they talked often enough that texting instead of calling seemed unusual to him, and second, he believed he was talking to my wife. I remember staring at that message while Ashley sat a few feet away scrolling through her phone, occasionally laughing at something on social media, completely unaware that the ground under our marriage was already cracking open. I decided to play along because by that point I wanted the truth more than I wanted comfort. So I typed back slowly, trying to imitate the casual tone she used in her texts that I had seen on the phone bill records earlier. I wrote something like, "Just checking if we're still on for tonight." The response came almost immediately, faster than most people reply to friends, which already said a lot. He wrote, "Of course we are. Same place as last time. I'll pick you up around 2 again." 2 again. That single word made my stomach drop because it confirmed the security footage wasn't a one-time thing or some weird misunderstanding. This was a routine, a schedule, something they had done enough times that they didn't even bother explaining details anymore. I felt my chest tighten while Ashley kept talking about her day, completely unaware that I was holding evidence of her secret life in my hand. Then Daniel sent another message that made everything worse. "Your husband still clueless?" I swear my heart actually skipped a beat when I read that. I had been expecting flirting, maybe some planning, but seeing a stranger casually refer to me like I was some obstacle they laughed about behind my back was a different kind of pain entirely. For a moment, I almost walked into the kitchen and slammed the phone down in front of Ashley right there, but something stopped me. I needed to see how far this actually went. So I typed back one more message, my hands shaking slightly even though I was trying to keep the words calm and casual. I wrote, "Yeah, he has no idea." Daniel responded with a laughing emoji and a line that I'm pretty sure I'll remember for the rest of my life. He wrote, "Good. I'd hate for him to ruin our fun." At that moment, Ashley stood up from the couch and stretched, complaining dramatically about how exhausting her workday had been. She walked over and kissed my cheek like everything between us was perfectly normal, then headed upstairs saying she needed to shower before bed. The entire time I just sat there frozen with my phone in my hand, staring at that last message from the man who apparently thought my marriage was some kind of joke. And that was when something unexpected happened that turned this already terrible situation into something even more surreal. About 5 minutes after Ashley went upstairs, Daniel sent another text. But this one wasn't meant for her. It was meant for me, because somehow he had started to suspect that the person texting him might not actually be my wife. The message that came from Daniel 5 minutes later made the air in my chest feel suddenly too tight to breathe. I was still sitting on the couch staring at his last line about not wanting me to ruin their fun when my phone buzzed again, and the new message read slowly across the screen like something out of a bad movie. "Ashley, why are you texting like this tonight? You okay?" At first, I thought maybe he was just confused by my wording, but then another message followed almost immediately. Longer this time, the tone noticeably different. "Also, you usually add that little smiley thing when you text. Did something happen with your husband?" That was the moment I realized I had underestimated how familiar they were with each other. This wasn't some casual fling where they barely knew each other's habits. He knew the way she texted, the little patterns in her messages, the tiny details that usually only spouses notice. And the realization that another man apparently understood those details about my wife better than I did hit me harder than any insult ever could. I stared at the screen for several seconds, debating what to do next. Part of me wanted to block the number immediately, throw the phone across the room, and wake Ashley up with the truth right then and there. But another part of me, the colder and more patient side that had taken over since this whole thing started, realized something important. If Daniel suspected something was wrong, I had a very small window to push him into revealing more before he shut everything down. So instead of answering his question directly, I wrote something vague. I typed, "Just tired tonight. Long day. I tried to keep it short because I figured the less I said, the less likely he would notice the difference in tone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the typing bubbles appeared again, and he sent a message that made my stomach twist in a completely new way. "You sure everything's good? You seemed nervous last night. Did he start asking questions or something?" I felt my pulse hammer in my ears reading that because suddenly the situation wasn't just about secret meetings and late-night phone calls. They had been talking about me, discussing me, probably laughing about how easy it was to fool me. And the worst part was that Daniel sounded genuinely concerned, not about my wife's marriage, but about whether their secret might get exposed. Before I could even decide how to respond, Ashley's voice suddenly came drifting down from upstairs, sharp and irritated in that familiar tone she used when she wanted something immediately. "Michael, can you come here for a second? The shower handle is acting weird again and I can't figure out why the water keeps switching to cold." I quickly locked my phone and walked upstairs, my mind racing because the person calling me right now was the same woman who had just spent weeks sneaking out of our house at 2 a.m. to meet another man. When I stepped into the bathroom, she was standing there wrapped in a towel, annoyed and impatient, pointing dramatically at the shower like the entire plumbing system had personally betrayed her. And while she complained about the water temperature and told me I needed to fix it because that's what husbands are for, my phone vibrated quietly in my pocket again. Daniel had sent another message, but this time it wasn't a question. It was a warning. When I finally got a moment alone a few minutes later, I stepped out of the bathroom and checked my phone again, my hands already tense because I could tell from the tone of his last message that something had shifted. Daniel had written only one sentence, but it felt like a crack of thunder right in the middle of everything. "If that's really you, send the picture we took in my truck last Friday." For a few seconds I just stared at the screen, because that sentence carried more meaning than he probably realized. First, it confirmed there absolutely had been a last Friday, which meant their meetings weren't just quick conversations in a parked car like I had seen in the security footage. Second, it told me they had taken photos together, which suggested a level of comfort and familiarity that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. But the real problem was that he clearly suspected something was wrong now. I stood there in the hallway outside the bathroom listening to the shower run while Ashley hummed softly behind the door like she didn't have a single worry in the world. The water splashed against the tiles, steam drifting under the door, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the woman inside that bathroom could look so relaxed, while my entire understanding of our life together was collapsing piece by piece. I didn't respond to Daniel's message because there was no safe answer anymore. If I tried to bluff again, he would almost certainly realize it wasn't her. If I ignored him, he might start calling. And the last thing I wanted right then was for Ashley's phone to ring while she was in the shower with me standing 5 feet away holding the truth in my pocket. So I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I put my phone on silent and waited. About 10 minutes later, Ashley stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, brushing water out of her hair while complaining about the shower pressure like it was the biggest crisis in our lives. She looked completely normal, even cheerful, and when she caught me watching her, she gave me this slightly irritated smile and said, "Why are you staring at me like that, Michael? You look like someone just died." I forced a small laugh and shook my head, saying something vague about being tired from work. She rolled her eyes dramatically and walked past me toward the bedroom, muttering about how I was always so moody lately. Watching her walk away, I realized something unsettling. Ashley wasn't acting nervous at all. If she had any suspicion that her secret might be unraveling, she hid it perfectly. That uneasy calm lasted for about 30 seconds. Then her phone, sitting on the nightstand beside the bed, suddenly lit up with an incoming call. The name on the screen was the same one I had seen earlier in the phone records. Emily, work. Ashley glanced at the phone, and the expression on her face changed instantly. The casual annoyance disappeared, replaced by a flash of something sharp and tense that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. She grabbed the phone so fast it nearly slid off the nightstand, turned slightly away from me, and answered in a hushed voice that sounded completely different from the confident tone she had used with me just seconds earlier. "Hey, why are you calling right now?" she said quietly. There was a pause while Daniel spoke on the other end, and I watched her shoulders slowly stiffen. Then Ashley turned around and looked straight at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. A mixture of anger, panic, and suspicion all tangled together, and the first words out of her mouth made my blood run cold. She said, "Michael, did you text someone from my phone tonight?" When Ashley asked that question, the room went so quiet that I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock down the hallway. She stood there holding her phone to her ear, staring at me with this narrow, suspicious look that felt completely different from the annoyed expressions she usually threw my way. For a moment, neither of us moved, and the tension in that bedroom thickened like a storm about to break. I remember forcing a confused expression and saying slowly, "What are you talking about? Why would I be texting anyone from your phone?" Ashley didn't answer me immediately because Daniel was still talking on the other end of the call. Her eyes stayed locked on mine while she listened, and I could practically see the calculation happening behind them as she tried to piece together what was going on. Then she turned away from me slightly and lowered her voice even further, speaking into the phone in a tight, irritated whisper that carried just enough for me to catch pieces of it. "No, I didn't send that. Of course I didn't. Why would I suddenly text you like that? You're being paranoid right now." That word, paranoid, hung in the air like something poisonous. It was the exact same word she had used on me earlier that morning when I asked if she had gone anywhere during the night. Listening to her say it now to the man she had been sneaking around with felt like watching the same lie play out twice in one day. After another few seconds, she ended the call abruptly and tossed the phone onto the bed with a frustrated sigh, then turned back toward me with that sharp defensive energy she gets whenever she feels cornered. She crossed her arms and said in this irritated, almost accusing tone, "Daniel thinks someone texted him from my number pretending to be me. He says the messages were weird and didn't sound like me at all." I shrugged slowly, trying to keep my face calm even though my heart was pounding. "And you think that someone was me?" I asked. She stared at me for a long moment before answering, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried that familiar biting edge that always appeared when she felt the need to dominate an argument. "I don't know, Michael, but you've been acting strange all evening. Quiet, watching me, asking questions about last night. It's not exactly normal behavior." I let out a short laugh, though it came out rougher than I intended. "So now I'm suspicious because I asked a simple question?" Ashley rolled her eyes dramatically, pacing a few steps across the bedroom like she was already exhausted by the conversation. "Oh, please, don't start acting like the victim. Daniel is a coworker and we talk about work projects sometimes. That's it. If you're going to turn every little thing into some ridiculous accusation, then maybe the real issue here is your trust problems." Hearing her say that while knowing everything I had already seen, the security footage, the phone records, the late-night meetings, made something deep inside my chest tighten with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She wasn't just lying anymore. She was rewriting the entire story right in front of me and expecting me to accept it. But the most unexpected part of that moment came a few seconds later when her phone buzzed again on the bed. Ashley glanced down at the screen, and whatever she saw made the color drain from her face almost instantly. Her confident posture vanished, replaced by a rigid stillness that looked dangerously close to panic. Slowly, she turned the phone toward me, and in a quiet voice that no longer sounded confident or sarcastic, she said something that changed the entire situation again. "Michael, why is Daniel sending me a screenshot of messages from your phone number?" When Ashley turned the phone toward me and said that Daniel had sent her screenshots from my number, it felt like the entire situation had suddenly spun out of control in a way I hadn't planned for. My brain tried to catch up with what she had just said, because up until that moment Daniel had only been messaging the number saved as Emily, work. I had never contacted him directly from my own phone number. That meant something else had happened while I was distracted dealing with Ashley in the bathroom. Ashley's hands were trembling slightly as she held the phone out, the screen glowing between us like evidence in a courtroom. I looked down and saw the messages Daniel had forwarded to her. They were short, blunt, and impossible to misunderstand. The first message from my number read, "You should probably stop contacting my wife." The second one was even colder. "This is Michael." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room felt thick enough to choke on. Ashley slowly lowered the phone and stared at me like she was seeing a stranger standing in her bedroom. The usual sarcastic confidence she carried around like armor had vanished completely. What replaced it was anger mixed with something that looked a lot like fear. "Did you send these?" she demanded, her voice rising sharply. I shook my head slowly, genuinely confused now because I hadn't written those messages. "No," I said quietly. "But I'm guessing someone figured out what was going on before either of us expected." Ashley's eyes narrowed, and the defensive attitude snapped back into place like a switch flipping. "Don't play games with me, Michael," she snapped. "You're the only one who would even know his number." At that point, something inside me finally broke loose, because hearing her accuse me while pretending she hadn't been sneaking out of the house for weeks felt like being insulted and lied to at the same time. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "You're right about one thing. I do know his number." She froze. The room went silent again as the meaning of that sentence settled in. Ashley's expression shifted slowly from anger to realization, like pieces of a puzzle snapping together inside her head. "You went through my phone," she said quietly. I nodded once. "I checked the security cameras first." Her face turned pale. For several seconds she just stood there staring at me, and I could see the moment when she understood that the entire lie she had been maintaining had finally collapsed. The excuses, the sarcastic comments, the fake coworker name, all of it had been exposed in one sentence. Ashley opened her mouth like she was about to launch into another explanation, another defensive speech about how I was overreacting or misunderstanding everything. But this time I raised my hand and stopped her before she could start. "I already know enough," I said quietly. The anger drained out of me in that moment, leaving behind something heavier and sadder than rage. I looked at the woman I had built a life with and realized how far we had drifted without either of us saying the words out loud. "I'm not interested in arguing about every detail," I continued slowly. "What matters is that trust is gone, and once that breaks, it changes everything." Ashley didn't respond right away. She sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor like she was trying to process how quickly things had spiraled out of control. The confident, sharp-tongued woman who always seemed to dominate every argument suddenly looked small and uncertain. I stood there for another moment before finally speaking again. "I'm going to stay with my brother for a while," I said. "We both need space to think about what happens next." She looked up at me, and for the first time that night the anger in her expression softened into something closer to regret. But by then the damage had already been done. Looking back now, the biggest lesson I learned from all of this is painfully simple. Relationships don't collapse in one dramatic moment. They crack slowly, quietly, through small lies and unspoken frustrations until one day, something happens that exposes everything at once. If anyone reading this is starting to notice those cracks in their own relationship, my advice is this: talk about them early, honestly, and directly. Silence and secrecy are what turn small problems into disasters. Because once trust disappears, you can't just pretend things are normal again. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is realizing that the person you trusted most has been living a completely different story right beside you the whole time.